Welcome. We're excited to bring you a new mini-series called Literacy Now Together, a special collaboration between FULCRUM and Parents for Reading Justice.
Welcome, everyone. We are excited for this podcast today. So we have Winifred, Winston and LeDerick Horne with us from the Black and Dyslexic podcast, friends of mine, luminaries in the field, advocates for children, and people who are really bridging the gap and informing communities about what needs to happen on behalf of kids to be served well in schools. That Black and Dyslexic podcast was one of my first introductions to this space. And the fact that this power duo was willing to make it public and talk about something that really isn't voiced, not just the power of advocacy and parental involvement, but also how dyslexia is impacting students of color, specifically Black students throughout the country, and the unique needs they have and how it impacts them on a day-to-day basis. I'm just so excited that you guys are here and joining us. Thank you. And we're going to jump right into it. So my first question to you is, what did you want to get done with that podcast?
The podcast came from me doing a hashtag on Instagram called Black and Dyslexic. My daughter is dyslexic, and I'm going to be very transparent. You know who you have on this show.
I know.
So in starting this journey with advocacy, when you look up Black folks, you saw the same 5 people: Kareem Weaver, LeDerick Horne, Sean Anthony Robinson, Amir Baraka, right? You just saw the same group of people. And when I started advocating with Decoding Dyslexia, we did an audit of the whole Decoding Dyslexia, all their websites, all their pages, and there were no Black folks, right? And I started thinking like representation matters. So I started doing celebrities. Then I started doing hashtags, Black and Dyslexic on Instagram, of everyday dyslexics. And in the course of George Floyd being murdered, I was awakened that all allies were not allies. And I said, you know what? I'm going to focus on folks that look like me. I'm going to do Black and Dyslexic. And it was my mentor and friend in the space, Claire Reese. I got a little discouraged with someone trying to take the name. And she was like, wrap it up, get some funding and make it a podcast. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And so that's how the Black and Dyslexic came to fruition. And I will say we got pushback. My board was like, do you really want to do that? Folks online, I couldn't post it and advertise it on a lot of the different literacy groups.
Why didn't they think, what was the reservation about? Why didn't they?
Why all dyslexics, everybody needs to learn how to read. So all can read. Why are you just signaling out Black people? That's racist. You're being racist. And a lot of times I'd say, well, when you look at this school and you see all white people, do you tell them that they're racist? What's wrong with me focusing on people that look like me? And so I stopped even advertising in some of the groups because I'm like, I got to tune out the noise. This is what I'm going to do. And then, of course, I asked LeDerick, hey, would you be my co-host? One of my board members was like, you can't do it by yourself. Ask LeDerick. He's a poet. He's a speaker. He's well respected in the community. And LeDerick did not hesitate. He was like, yes, I'll do it. And, I've lost opportunities. I've not been granted funding. But because I have Black in there, Black and Dyslexic.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Winifred and I, we met in 2019 at IDA's conference.
Yep.
I was on a panel and she came up and introduced herself, and if you know Winifred, she ain't scared to talk to somebody, and so we connected right away. And first of all, I had a degree of involvement in that dialogue around decoding dyslexia and their initially their lack of response around calls for Black Lives Matter. But I was also kind of examining my own work professionally and just saying, over the course of my career, what have I done that really targets Black folks? And I really just wanted to go deeper into the space. And so Winifred had provided me an opportunity that I was looking for already. It's just, she's an amazing social entrepreneur, amazing advocate. And so, to be able to lend my voice and be a part of this conversation has been great. And it's also, I'll say this, and I'll do it as a plug for folks to listen to our show. I learned a lot. I had been firmly in the learning disability, special education space, but hadn't gone as deep in the literacy space. And so it was through the interactions with the researchers and the literacy advocates, and then just having an opportunity with the podcast to connect to more folks who had not only lived a similar experience. And I come to this work as someone who is dyslexic. But just being able to connect with more folks who had, minds that were similar to mine, but also had a similar cultural experience. And so, I think folks should check it out, but it's also it's been a great journey for me. And and it's thanks to Winifred.
Hearing that friction or people being a little resistant to what you all were trying to do, it brings up a lot of questions. Up within the advocacy community and the dyslexic community. When you look at the movement itself, when I say the movement, I mean the push to get access for all children to learn how to read. When we talk about dyslexia, I'm going to tell you, like most of the time, whether it's decoding dyslexia, IDA, podcasts, different things, there aren't many Black folks involved. They're just not included or involved. But I would think that given that, if you want all kids, you're going to have to reach out to the groups and communities that, for whatever reason, haven't been part of the whole. It's curious to me. And so as you push through that and decided, we're going to do this anyway, and here's LeDerick, and he's going to join the team as well, the topics that you're focusing on, are they specific to Black children, or are they global topics for the entire community?
It's the Black experience, right? So we have 4 segments. We have the Badass Parent segment, where the parents tell them.
Wait, hold on.
I like that
you can't just drop that on as a
That's mine.
That's your segment.
I like that one.
The Badass Parent segment. Wow, okay. All right, I just need a minute on that. Okay, all right, go ahead.
But it's bad. It's Black and Dyslexic.
Okay, all right. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, so where parents tell their journey of trying to advocate for their children, right? And so often as a parent, as a Black parent too, you feel so alone. That's how I felt. I felt so alone. I would show up at meetings and I'm the only Black parent. I'm the only Black person. And I believe in being uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. So I stayed. Some Black parents would come and then they wouldn't show up at another meeting, but then they would email me or call me afterwards, right? So I wanted to do that segment. Then we do another one with lived experience. Right? If you have a lived experience, we want to hear your journey. And then we also reserve the other 2 spots for experts in the space, a literacy expert, an advocate, a speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, folks that I didn't know about, or how do they interconnected with dyslexia? Like, how do you get help? Why would you need a speech and language pathologist? What is OT for dysgraphia? And so I just came up with that idea. And as you tell your story as a Black parent, it is going to be different, right? It is going to be different. I was director of admissions at a special education school. My daughter attends a private special education school. It is different. And what I found was that a lot of the affluent white parents are in a bubble. They don't do anything outside of their normal environment. Let me give you an example. On Friday, my daughter, I would pick her up and I said, let's go. We either go to Chick-fil-A or the dollar store. And this one day she's playing with a little girl and, they're playing. I'm like, Logan, come on, let's go. I'm like, look, if you don't come on, we're not going to the dollar store. That little girl looked at me and said, what's the dollar store? And I looked at her mother and I said, it's the store where everything costs $1. Logan, let's go. So they're not thinking of the experience. And let me add, as director of admissions of a special education school, I had the responsibility of telling parents when their children did not get accepted, right? Now, when my daughter didn't get accepted to one of the private schools, I was so apologetic. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. When I called a white parent and told her that her child did not get in, who else can I speak to? I mean, my child is just like Billy, who he plays with outside, and I don't understand why Billy can't get in. And who else can I speak to? I would have never, ever thought to respond in that way. Not ever. So throughout the whole advocacy space, as you're advocating for your child, it's different for a Black parent. I have to show up a certain way or I'll get dinged the angry Black woman. Just telling our stories, it opens the eyes of other folks. Most of the listeners are white. And we knew that. And they tell us, I feel like a fly on the wall. I've always wanted to ask questions. I didn't even know I had that question, but I'm so happy I listened because now I understand. So it's just telling our journey, really, and opening their eyes to, it's different for Black folks. It's different for Black parents in this space.
Kareem, but the question and comment, it also sparks to me, what I've seen kind of cross movements is there's a danger in creating programming and saying it's for the general public, particularly when you don't have representation and leadership and the implementation of whatever that program is that is diverse and where everybody really has the opportunity to have sway over how any kind of programming is implemented. And what I have found is that oftentimes, like when you start digging in the data, whether it be, I don't know, a foods program or programs providing information within a state or something like that, a lot of times you'll see these general programs and the folks who actually show up and take advantage will be, kind of well-to-do white folks, moneyed white folks who have resources. And I think that if you really want to move the needle, for specific populations, it's important to craft messages and programming that really speaks to those people. Like Winifred phrased it is like, a lot of white folks are in a bubble, and I would actually say that they've inherited a history of segregation, and so that's what that bubble is. And so it is by design. It cuts us off from having shared experiences, and I think part of the joy of this medium is that we record these episodes, we put them out there, and I just kind of given the technology and digital divide and everything else, and just like who is active and like really kind of jumping into the dyslexic space. I had a sense like, we would have more white folks, but we don't know who's going to listen, and this stuff is living online. So, for all we know, we could be having conversations with people 10 years in the future. So podcasting it goes far and wide.
Brett, you've been working in this space for a long time with Parents for Reading Justice, the film Our Dyslexic Children. Does this surprise you hearing this? Is this?
Well, I'm disappointed because that is the lens that you guys see us in. But how do you, I talked to Kareem and I said, I want to work, I've got my district fixed. We're flipped to the science of reading. Now I want to work in Columbus Public. How do I do that? How do I reach out? In an authentic way. And I reached out to our local NAACP. And I joined and I went to meetings, but I wasn't really welcomed in. And I knew I couldn't lead this. I knew that, but I wanted to just be on the education committee and try to help, try to provide information. And when you came to Columbus, you said that our local leader, this wasn't on her radar at the time. And so I would love to know, how do you suggest that parents, white parents who don't want to live in their bubble, who do want to reach across lines, how do we do that? How can we do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Any recommendations or suggestions? Well, first of all, you've got folks listening to this podcast. That's going to open up eyes right there because they're talking about the different experiences and opportunities that are available to children. And I'm assuming also educators. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But just going into spaces where information is being given is good. That's one step that they can take. You all have any ideas about how to bridge those different communities?
I would say listen, really listen, right? Listen to understand, and show up with humility and a willingness to learn. I've had, being a part of Decoding Dyslexia, Maryland, I would have white advocates ask me a question. Well, Winifred, we're trying to do X, Y, and Z. Why isn't it working? And I would tell them an answer. I'm like, look, this is how you're being perceived. This is the reality. Well, no, this, that, and the third. And I'm like, you just asked me a question. I'm answering the question, but now you're going to tell me something else. So then I get frustrated and I'm like, you know what? Do you? Like, it's just frustrating. So just listen, but then also use your privilege to open doors and opportunities, right? For Black-led nonprofits, for Black speakers. Show that you care and show that you want to include folks without always just asking and saying, well, I don't know what to do. Show them. say, guess what? We're going to bring in a Black speaker, right? We're going to look at our board. So often the boards are predominantly white, right? Like, how are you doing work for all children and your board is not representative? So those are some things that just come to mind to me.
I think that the NAACP and other organizations that have historically served the Black community, I mean, being a part of those groups is a great start. But I think a lot of us are also looking for people who have already done a degree of work, that aren't just like you don't show up any space with just like, hey, I've identified a problem, right? But it's like, what are the 4 or 5 solutions that you've come up with and you've researched, and then and that piece, and it can't be reiterated enough. Utilizing privilege, I think Winifred and I have both, and I think it's just sort of the reality of being a Black person, particularly kind of like within the professional class, of just being like the only one that shows up to a meeting, right? And so like when you're in those sort of spaces, you're oftentimes looking for someone who is going to be a true ally. When it comes to like inviting Black folks onto boards, but don't just have the one, right? You want 2 or 3 folks that you bring on at one time. I've had that experience as well, where you're the only voice, and then you just don't have the ability to really move the needle in a significant way. The other extension to that is also staffing, paying Black folks well to be a part of different initiatives and programming. I think it's a solid approach to making any change, is that you actually want to employ the people who you want to serve. Again, because of segregation, we don't oftentimes have the social networks that cross across boundaries. And so, like you got to have Black friends, right? You gotta go into Black spaces, and make those connections. And so, what we're also talking about is it's a really long process, right? It's the long process of really being a part of a community, and not just showing up and just wanting to solve a problem.
Yeah, I was going to just say that when you're the only Black person, oftentimes they don't want your voice. You feel it. They don't want your voice. They just want a Black face. They want to be able to say, oh, we have one. And that's often the case in this literacy dyslexia space. That is very often the case. And I talk about this all the time. I was just a little, I don't know if I was just so focused on, I'm going to get help for my daughter, or just a little complicit. I've gone to 2 PWIs, predominantly white institutions. My first 2 jobs out of college, I was the only Black person in my role. Initially, I was just like, oh no, we're all going to get help. And I'm in this, and Black parents were calling me and they were saying, well, she said this and it made me feel a certain way. No, she really wants to help. She cares. And then when LeDerick came to Decoding Dyslexia and said, are you guys going to put out a statement about Black Lives Matter? And the response from folks that I had just hung out with in IDA in Portland, Oregon, it hurt me. Like, my feelings were really hurt. And then when I had a situation where I called someone out about some inappropriate statement they made on Facebook, I felt attacked by women and mothers and advocates that I thought really cared about all children. And I'm like, wow. And I had to reevaluate my own privilege in this space, right? I have the ability to say, oh, I know Kareem. I can call up Kareem. Yeah, I have his email. Or, oh, I know who Brett is. Yeah, we communicated. I've seen our dyslexic children. Oh, let me reach out. And then that's what really said, you know what? I need to focus on my community and build a network, like other folks have a network of professionals in this space. And then that's what really pushed me, because I felt like I wasn't doing enough, and I had been complicit when all these parents were complaining to me, because I walked in the space. My name is Winifred Winston. I was a broadcast journalism major. I've shown up for interviews and folks go, oh, you're Winifred. Yes, it's me. They weren't expecting me, right? I've lived that most of my professional career. And being able to switch careers and become director of admissions of a special education school, because I needed to understand the process and how these parents are getting help, and how are they getting into these schools, and what do these schools look like, and how can I send that to the charter or the private school. So that part was just really huge. It was just really huge.
You mentioned NAACP. 2014, Clarice Jackson and others put forward a resolution that passed their National Board of Directors around dyslexia. You can go on their website and see that they officially declared it a civil rights issue. But the folks, regular everyday people, don't know much about dyslexia. Oftentimes people think instead of this kid might be dyslexic or there might be a learning difference, they think the kid is just not smart. I'm curious, can you speak to that? Within the community, the expectations for children and how we interpret their struggles, how we perceive what's going on, and then how we move after that.
Yeah, if I could just jump at it. Yeah, it's also one of the frustrations, right? Like when you're straddling these like in these two kind of movements. Yeah, like, I've interacted with chapters of the NAACP, and folks don't really have learning disabilities or learning differences on their radar at all, right?
Yeah, not on the agenda.
Yeah, and I've been at great cultural events, King's Holiday, this, that, and the other, and I'll tell a bit of my own story and my struggles with reading, and folks are just like, well, you didn't work hard enough, and it reflects, it's not just in our community, like it extends throughout the West and beyond. It's also part of the work, learning how to speak folks' language, being grounded in your own experience. And I think it's also why it's key for more of us to share our experiences and to be as clear around, like, no, I had, I worked hard. I mean, and in my experience, the dyslexics I know, the people who are neurodivergent, people with disabilities, like these are some of the hardest working people that I know. And I think many of us, when we really set our minds to, like, I'm going to excel in whatever area, we realize it's going to come at us sacrificing our social lives and, and kind of being really monofocused on whatever it is we have to do. I have the privilege of working with great researchers, and I have, I've interacted with lawmakers. But I am also very aware that a big part of this work is a cultural problem. It is shifting beliefs, values, it's shifting the way we use language. And that I think also helps to inform how we build schools and other structures. And so it's important that we engage with artists, with cultural workers to shift this culture. And the art of a conversation is part of it, right? It's part of what we're doing here. There are people who are a lot more likely to listen to this podcast conversation than they are to read a study, right? And and so I think it's part of it, right? Like sharing the story, sharing it through different mediums, right? It helps to break down some of those barriers. And you also just kind of have to find your people, right? Find your people within these spaces, the one or two where, like my favorite term now is co-conspirators. Find those one or two people within the space who you're on the same wavelength with, and that, maybe that's in your church, or, maybe it's in the broader community, and it's y'all mobilizing and coming out with strategies and figure out how to connect with people.
I would add that it's just also education, right? When my daughter was identified, they said SLD. And my daughter was 3 years old. Her vocabulary was vast. And she was just so inquisitive, and she asked so many questions. But by kindergarten, she wasn't learning to read, and it was hard for her to remember sight words. And I was like, something is amiss here. So I knew she was bright, and I was like, something's going on. And in kindergarten, she got pulled from the reading group, but then she also graduated valedictorian. I was like, okay, what's going on here? So we get to public charter school, and I immediately start telling them I'm a little concerned about her reading, and her handwriting is going to be sloppy, you guys, because she learned how to write in cursive, and now you guys are writing in print. So, she's trying to be like everybody else. And when they mentioned evaluation, I did not flinch. I did not say, oh, I was like, yeah, you guys did, I didn't notice they were RTI. I didn't know that term, right? Because I wasn't educated. I just knew that they were helping her. And I didn't see enough progress. And I welcomed the evaluation. And her dad said, why are you letting them evaluate her? She's not slow.
That's common. That's the common belief right there. I don't evaluate my child. Don't put him in that. I don't want anything to do with special ed. I don't want anything to do with it. That runs deep in the community.
Yes. And I said to him, I know she's not slow. That's why I want to get her evaluated. Like, I know she's smart. Something else is going on, right? And so with the podcast, we really wanted to remove the stigma and educate parents, because my daughter, I knew she was smart, but something was amiss. And I could even tell by the team, they were shocked when I was like, yes, let's evaluate her. Because I kept saying, I can't fix it if I don't know what the problem is. And I know that there's a problem. And so in the Black community, when we talked about this on our podcast, culturally and historically, we had to be perfect. Because guess what happened? If you weren't perfect, what happened? You couldn't have a label or something wrong with you. You were sold and you were separated from your family. Right? I've had to talk to parents where they say, I don't want another label. I already have a Black child, a Black young man. And I will be very transparent with parents. I said, look, they're going to label your child regardless. Defiant, emotionally disturbed. I said, do you want the right identification or the wrong one? I said, and let's be clear. You have a Black young man. They may label him inmate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's go ahead and take this dyslexia so we can get them the help that they need. And then after K-12, it's up to them to self-advocate. So it's a lot about removing the stigma. And so when we highlight celebrities or everyday dyslexics who are very successful, I'm constantly putting that in folks' head. I'm like, oh, Usher Raymond's dyslexic. Kobe Bryant was dyslexic. Octavia Spencer is dyslexic. Kerry Washington is dyslexic. They're like, what? So I'm constantly trying to educate and remove that stigma. And with our podcast, very conversational. I don't do the teacher talk because I want it accessible. I want folks to listen in and feel comfortable and like, oh, I understand what they're saying. So a lot of it is about removing that stigma and showing them that, yes, they can have a learning difference and be successful. And here are folks that are successful. And what I always tell them is, now you're a part of the bad community, and I'm going to point you in the right direction and get you the help that you need, because it's the advocacy, because it's impossible to understand the legal, the law, the advocacy, the reading, the literacy, the dyslexia, and how it shows up for your child. That's a lot. So let me point you in the right direction and get you connected to some experts to help you along this journey. And then we also find that once we get the parent on board and they're helping their children, what happened? My daughter's father, he's dyslexic. He
it runs in families. Yeah, it runs in families.
Yes. So then we'll have the parents I'll have the parents telling me, oh, well, I think my husband is, or, oh, I had those same struggles. So that part, the education and removing the stigma.
Yeah, I have something to add to that, but I'm going to open it up to you, Brett, first, if you have a comment to make. Then I'm going to come back to something that Winifred said.
Just that the knowledge is power, and it will heal a family. And that is not just unique to the Black community. A lot of people don't want their kid to be dyslexic. But I think what you raised, we interviewed a family outside of Niagara Falls, the Blabers, and they talked about their child was being labeled as misbehaving and naughty, and they almost had child protective services called on this child. So the stakes are much higher sometimes for Black families. So I think that kind of real talk, I think that's critical. Yeah. As you say, they will be labeled one way or the other. Yeah. So let's go with what can help them.
And let me just add to that too. You mentioned your child not reading in kindergarten and some of the things. So expectations have a big part in this. What are our expectations for different groups of children? There are some people who would say, well, why are you worried about it? It's just kindergarten. She's nice. She's fine, or whatever it is. Don't worry about it. Your expectations are just too high. And our parents hear that all the time. It's almost like go over there and sit down and be quiet, especially if you're not a professional. If you wear a blue collar instead of a white collar, and these folks with degrees are telling you, you know what, I understand you love your child, but, it's only kindergarten. They're fine. But you as a parent know something is going on. Something's going on, but you don't have the educational background to really perceive what it is. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of expectations, both from the school side and also from the parent side, in terms of dyslexia and when the alarm bells go off for children?
Let me tell you, her kindergarten teacher told me, Mom, you're too firm, you're too hard with her, because when she comes up to read, she's shaking. That was that anxiety. And I'm like, oh, okay. But I was just, she's my only child. My mom was a single mom. She was a nurse. She worked 2 full-time jobs. And me and my cousin, we laugh about how we made it through because my mom came to parent teacher conference every now and again. My mom didn't let me take classes to go work in the factory in North Carolina. She was like, no, you're going to college. She had a certain expectation for me, but she wasn't as present, right? Because she couldn't be. So I was determined to be present. And my niece, her son was born in May. My daughter was born in February. And so they're the same age. So I didn't want to compare them, but my nephew Kareem was kind of taken off, and he had written Logan a letter, and that was her favorite cousin. And when the letter came in the mail and I gave it to her, and she just tossed it. Like she didn't even want to try to read it. And I was like, wait a minute, this is her favorite cousin. So I had an expectation that, first of all, I was going to be involved. I was going to pay attention, but my daughter was going to read and you're going to be AB student. Like you're going to make straight A's. Like that was my expectation. I'm full on. And the educator said to me, Mom, I need you to back up a little bit. She's shaking. I'll never forget that. She's shaking when she comes to reading group, because after I found out she was dyslexic, I felt like shit. I was just like, oh my gosh, it was, like she had a learning disability. But we went to public school. I was the same way. Again, my expectation was something is off here. We're going to figure it out. And I welcomed the evaluation. Now, when they gave me SLD, I didn't just sit with that. Oftentimes we'll get an identification and be like, oh, okay, the school's going to handle it. I'd worked in the school district, so I had privilege of inside knowledge of how things worked.
And you knew people, right? And all that. Yeah.
And so when she was identified and they said SLD, I kept probing. How are you going to teach her how to read? Oh, we're going to call on her. We're going to let her know in advance when she's on the carpet. That's not reading. Like, how are you going to? I kept asking. And at the very end of the IEP meeting, the psychologist said, well, when a child has dyslexia, I said, oh, she has dyslexia. And the body language, everything changed. Well, we don't, I said, well, how do I get her tested for dyslexia? Well, we don't know. And I said, what is going on here? Got in my car, start crying. I said, something is going on. They don't want to tell me something.
They don't want to say it. Yeah.
And I called my cousin who's an attorney, and she was like, well, she probably has a learning disability. And she was very cavalier, and you need to do this and you need to do that. And I said, okay, I got to go back to the school. So once I got that word, I started researching, because now my expectation was on the school. You need to do better. You need to do better for my daughter. But I did not know terminologies. I didn't even know the 5 components of literacy. I did not know initially they started with RTI, right? They did. I didn't know all these things, but I just knew something was going on with my baby. Now that I know that we have this word, now I was focused on making them do what they needed to do. But because I had the privilege and knowledge of being an educator, because I worked at headquarters first, right? So I had to have hard conversations with principals and leadership. So I could read body language, and I wasn't intimidated to speak up, right? A lot of parents are afraid to speak up. I did not. I was fearless. So that's how I started saying, okay, the expectation now needs to be on the school to do better, right? I went there first. And then I started doing my own thing as far as getting her tutoring, and then we pulled her because, again, I didn't understand the process. So I pulled her.
So you weren't afraid of that label. So here's this word dyslexia. You heard it and you reacted. A lot of us, we don't want our child to be labeled. Please do not label my child, because that leads to a bunch of other things. But you seem to almost welcome some hint as to what was going on with your child. And I'm curious why that was your approach or response.
Okay. So once I called my cousin, who I love, I trust, everything. She was just so like, it's okay, do this. And she's talking all this stuff that I didn't understand. And I really didn't hear her. Then I called the pediatrician who I trusted, and I was crying. I was in tears because I had looked into a tutoring program was $18,000. Independent education evaluation was another $4,000. That was $22,000 in 3 days. I was told I needed to help my baby learn to read. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And I called the pediatrician. She referred me to a psychologist. The psychologist was the first person who just talked to me like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I need you to do this. I need you to go to Wright's Law website, spend 10 minutes, sign up for the newsletter. I need you to go to the private dyslexia schools and see what they're doing. And I'm like, there are private dyslexia schools? She's like, yeah. And lo and behold, I pass one every day on my way to work. I just didn't know. But the way she talked to me was like, it's not a death sentence. Here's what you need to do, and she's going to be fine. Right? When I spoke to my Black friends and family who knew nothing about this, oh, you being over the top. Logan is so smart. She's going to be fine. You know, she's your only child. You're doing too much. I didn't know. I know my child had this gut. I'm a mother. I knew something else was going on, but I just knew if I follow these things, and I started researching, I fall asleep listening to podcasts, YouTube videos. I'm reading Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally, and I can barely pronounce every other word. I don't know what this book is saying, but this is what they're telling me I need to do. I need to educate myself. So I knew that my daughter was going to be okay. I just knew it. I just believed it. And I'm like, I'm her mother. I'm going to make sure she gets what she needs. Right. And as I started researching, then I learned her dad is dyslexic. It made perfect sense why he struggled earning his bachelor's degree. And when I would read over his work, he would leave the ED off of words. Well, I thought it was his Baltimore accent. No, he was dyslexic, but I knew he had a brilliant mind. The man could look up in the sky and name things. And, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. And as life would have it, you guys, my internship, 25 years ago, my public relations internship was with Special Olympics North Carolina. Right. So I wasn't afraid of folks who learned differently or who had disabilities or who were disabled. Right. But I knew that I needed to follow this system and she will get help. But I knew immediately that the system was rigged. Right. Because I live in Baltimore City where it's 80. Oh, my gosh, I'm not sure the numbers, but like 85% Black folks. Right. There's private schools that have less than 5% of Black children. People are busing their children from all across the state to go to this private specialized school. But I'm right here in Baltimore City where it's 85% Black folks and they don't attend those schools.
So the power of and the fortitude not to be thrown off by labels, not to, because, you know, we get in our bag real quick when it comes to, you know, our children being labeled. And instead, first, I need to understand that 504 plan or that IEP and signing those, that's power in your hand.
Legal document.
That's a legal document.
Federal.
Yeah. So now, if you can get this diagnosis, and it costs a lot of money. You talked about $22,000 between the tutoring and the tests and everything. Not everybody has $22,000. Not everybody has that kind of money, and so it can be intimidating. But if you can get that document, that is power in your hands. And I just think many of us just don't know that. We're afraid of the label and don't really appreciate the dynamics of power within schools. LeDerick, you know, our journeys reflect the implementation of power, the application of power. And how do we get our parents to understand that you're in a power struggle and you need every tool at your disposal? How do we speak to parents, or how would you recommend parents look at the IEP or a 504 and not get bogged down in the stigma, the stereotypes of being marginalized or pushed to special ed? You know, historically that has happened. That's true. But how do you get people to understand this is actually access to power if you know how to play this game?
Yeah. Well, I do think it is important that we do recognize people, like the historic experience and people's lived experience, right? You know, and like what we've already said, there's a genetic component to a lot of this. So a lot of parents are dealing with their own experience of passing through a school system that was not designed to serve them. And, you know, doing all they can to make sure that their kid doesn't go through that. And so I do think that some of the earnest really does fall on our schools to say, look, this is what having this label means now. I'm not sure what you experienced back in the day, but here are the supports. And I think it's part of the role that parent advocates, like being integrated into a school system and used in a proactive way, right? So that if someone comes into the district or a child gets recognized, they're not having a conversation with a school staff member who, frankly, a lot of us just aren't going to trust. If they can actually just talk to someone in the districts who's had a lived experience, I've seen that as being like a real effective way to break down a lot of those barriers. But with that, yeah, it's knowledge of the law. And I'll take it back to the high expectation piece too. Like we human beings have got to learn to love dyslexics. We really have to learn to love us. One of the things I do in my talks is I'll reference Logan's work in the UK, who looked at American entrepreneurs, and she found that like 35% of American entrepreneurs were folks who had learning disabilities, some kind of learning challenges. If you get the right supports, if you're placed under the right circumstances, I mean, like we create jobs, we are innovators, we're remarkable. So having those expectations be high is key, and I think a lot of it like one of the aspects of disability culture is that it is oftentimes communicated from one person who has a disability to another. It's not oftentimes conveyed in other forms of culture, and so it's creating the spaces where we can talk to each other, where we can connect with each other, and and just keeping that cycle going.
I also think that parents don't understand the process, right? So there's a process you have to go through before you're determined eligible for the IEP or the 504. I get parents that reach out to me and they're like, "Oh, my daughter is struggling to read. I think she has dyslexia. Can you help me?" And I'm like, "Are you in public school or private school?" And I'm like, "Have you gone to the school?" In my case, they gave us the diagnosis of SLD. I didn't need that independent educational evaluation, right? I had it. And that's what the psychologist said to me. She said, "You don't want to overassess her." She said, she has it. So what I did was I fought for them to put the word dyslexia on the IEP, because I said to them, my daughter has dyslexia. Y'all, I was reading out of How to Advocate for Your Dyslexic Child in a Public School. I was reading out of the book in the IEP meeting. They said, "Oh, dyslexia is a general term." I said, the school will tell you dyslexia is I was reading out of the book because I knew that she needed Orton Gillingham. I knew she needed an intervention, right? Not just accommodations. So I fought for that, but I still didn't understand the process. I went to an attorney. I paid the $250 consultation fee, and I had signed her up for the expensive tutoring. And he said, "Stop the tutoring." And I went to his office with a rolly, because now my IEP binder is a rolly bag. And he's like, "Stop the tutoring." I'm like, "No." Like her assistant teacher called me whispering, "Miss Winston, what are you doing with Logan? I see her using the strategies in class." They were able to do that in 2 weeks, what the school couldn't do in 4 months. But I didn't understand why he was telling me to stop the tutoring. He was telling me to stop the tutoring because now the school can take credit and say that the IEP is working when it's the tutoring that's working. I didn't understand any of that. I just left his office crying, saying, "My daughter is learning to read. I'm not listening to him. Why would I stop the tutoring?" I didn't know. And then my daughter did 10 hours of tutoring, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday for like 6 months. My baby was in 2nd grade. I said, "Okay, we are broke." And I had the privilege of a very high credit score, because I would swipe the card one week, I would pay the next. Her father would swipe a card, he would pay the next. This is how we were doing it. I had the privilege of an excellent credit score and access to credit, right? Because I couldn't afford the 109. First it was 97, then it went to 109 per session. So I don't know, somebody do the math, like 10 hours. No, that's a lot of money. So then I just said, well, I'm going to put her in a dyslexic private school. I didn't even know that they looked for a particular profile. I was like, it's a dyslexic school. She's dyslexic. She's going to get in. I didn't even know any of that. So I work with an organization in Maryland, in Southern Maryland, called See Us, Special Education Excellence for Underserved Students. And their mission is to help all parents have access to advocacy. All parents have access to advocacy, right? Because you have to understand the process. How do you get eligible for an IEP, a 504? What do those goals mean? Are they written correctly, right? I could look at my daughter's IEP and say, okay, these goals are trash, but I didn't know how to tell them to make it right, right? And so a good advocate to help you navigate the system, you can really fight for what you need.
Parents are thinking, when they're going to hear this, they're going to say, how do I get that? How can I get plugged into some organization like that? Do you have any guidance or insight on what parents might be able to do or where they should go?
Yes, we have a website, www.soallcanread.org. Reach out, right? Reach out. I heard you on the podcast, Winifred. You said XYZ. Reach out, right? Because again, my privilege, right? I'm going to use that word, and all the people that I know across this country and abroad, I'm going to point them in the right direction. As simple as that.
Yeah, I'll just put a fine point on it. Nobody should go through this process alone. It's too complicated. The studies say that the folks who tend to get the most out of special education services tend to be folks with master's degrees, right? Like the language is very thick, right? It's very difficult, and particularly when you go in, most folks are going to just default to kind of just being in parent mode, and they have to kind of have that external eye to be able to navigate through the process. And so, if you can connect with an advocate, that's great. If it gets to that point, but just at the very least, just have, even if it's just your friend with you in the room, when they're having these conversations, to just be an objective voice, right? And to step in and to know that you've got somebody in that space that has your back.
Don't go in there alone. Don't go in there alone, right? That's what I hear you saying, right? So because they're going to have 2 or 3 of them there, and then it's
more.
you, or more,
way more,
and they
actually.
all have titles, and there's going to come a point where you have to look at somebody and say, "Am I crazy? Am I hearing what I think I'm hearing? Did they just say what I think they said? Is it me?" And you need to have somebody in there who can at least be a sounding board, and ideally have somebody who can actually interpret all the stuff that's being thrown at you and help you to respond accordingly.
It's very overwhelming sitting in an IEP meeting and they start telling you what's wrong with your child. I typically went alone, and one time my daughter's father came with me. I thought this man went up to go to the bathroom. He never came back. He never came back in. And I said, what happened? He was sweating. He was like, I just couldn't be in there. I couldn't be in there. And then he was very emotional, because then he realized this was the support I was supposed to get, right? He was like, I was supposed to get this. So it's very hard. All of the advocacy that I do, everybody that I know in this space, we were going to re-engage the process because we were looking for other options for middle school and high school. I had a panic attack and I missed the IEP meeting. I couldn't go. And I mean, I had people DMing me, Winifred, I'll help you. Da, 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 da. I still I don't want to be at the table ever again. Right. So it is very important, like LeDerick said, to have someone with you who can be objective, because the attorneys that I know, the psychologists that I know, the literacy experts that I know, they still go into those meetings with an advocate or someone else, right? Because they have to turn that off and be a parent, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and I have folks who, I went to high school with, that'll hit me up 10, 20 years later on Facebook. Hey, my kid's struggling, right? And then it's like, they just want to have a conversation, what's going on. And so to give them, depending on where they are in the country, I can connect them to colleagues or what have you. But we we have social networks now. Like, it's easier than ever to be able to reach out to people. And I think some of it is kind of dealing with that shame, right? I think folks would probably be amazed if they got online and put a post and it's like, yo, my baby's struggling. Is there anybody out here who, has any advice, or, or going as far as saying, would want to be a part of this journey with me? I'm willing. I mean, you're not alone. It's too many of us out here, right? It's too many of us out here. And and so being able to connect within your own community, but you have to be out loud about it.
Any thoughts on that, Brett?
Well, I agree 100%. Reach out to, again, in every community, you're scared, you're not sure what's going on. So to reach out to other people, you realize other people's kids are struggling to read, other kids are dyslexic, and you can learn together. And what we found is that if you form a parent group, you can educate one another, you can support one another. As you said, go to IEP meetings with them. Somebody reads Overcoming Dyslexia, another person reads Pete Wright's book, and you can share that information. And like, I just kept thinking, Winifred, when you were talking, like your background in PR, your having been in a educational environment already, you had so many assets for a parent group that I was just like, oh my God, it would be amazing to have you as one of the members of a parent group to, and what our kind of passion is, once you get your kid the help that they need, form a parent group and go after that district and flip that whole district to the science of reading so that every child from then on benefits.
Well, that's the question. What does a child who is dyslexic need? When you're advocating, so there's advocating for, the school district and the school, but then there's the classroom. What needs to happen in that classroom? Let's say it's early reading, first grade or something. What do parents need to make sure it's happening in that classroom so that kids have access to literacy? Because frankly, the IEP process and that now we're talking about chasing an issue that has bubbled up. But hopefully, if things go right in the classroom from day one, the issues won't bubble up. But you'll still have some challenges, but a dyslexic can learn to read in class, right? They can learn to read. So the question is, what needs to be there? What should parents be on the lookout for to make sure it's present so their kid is getting what they need? Any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'm going to limit it to the educators need to be educated on how to teach reading. Here in Baltimore City, they are training teachers on letters, but they also use wit and wisdom, a curriculum, and there's not enough time in that curriculum for them to use the training that they've received, right? So that's a catch-22. Here in Maryland, Morgan State University, through my partnerships and collaborations, they are the only teacher prep program in the state of Maryland, undergrad teacher prep program that is seeking IDA accreditation. Right. So when those teachers leave that program, they're going to know how to teach reading. Right. So education has to be overhauled because the educators need to understand how to teach reading. That is a problem. And higher education is not doing their part. Right. A lot of them are not getting on board. And so when these teachers go into the school buildings, they're not prepared. And then some of them are spending money out of their own pocket to get the training. But then when they go to school, because of guidelines and rules, they can't really implement what they're learning. That is a huge problem. I don't know when that's going to change. Here in Maryland, we fought decoding dyslexia. We got legislation passed, the Right to Read Act. So then there's this whole thing about finding the right assessment tool. I was on a call I shouldn't have been on because I get invited to a lot of things. And I heard them saying that they were going to tell parents that they were testing their children for gifted and talented. Instead, like it's a whole lot that's wrong, right? Like it's a whole lot that's wrong. But at the backbone of it, the educators need to be empowered. They need to be empowered to teach children the way that they need to be taught and correctly, right? We know, and Kareem, this is from your presentation. I got this from your presentation. You had a pie map about curriculums being geared towards the small percentage of folks who could probably teach reading. And then you had this pocket of folks who need to be taught how to read. Then you had the dyslexics. I quote that, whatever it is, I can find it before I speak. And I talk about that chart that you created. And that's the problem that we have. These curriculums and tools are made for folks that already know how to read, right? And they're not doing what they need to do. But the educators need to be empowered. In public schools, the educators are not empowered. In private school, they do what works, right? And that's the reality. They can, because they do what work. But in the public schools, there's all these restrictions. And what people don't talk about, because not only was I administrator, I worked in HR. A lot of that is tied to their salary and their performance. A lot of that is tied to their livelihood, right? A lot of that is tied to their livelihood. And when I went back into schools as a high school teacher, I can remember calling up a special education friend. Now this is not right, but I did it anyway. I took the IEP binder home. I brought it home on the weekend. I was going through it because I wanted to see who had an IEP and how do I accommodate them. I was literally going through and asking my special educator friend, now, what do I do for this student? How do I do this? Right. And then I would be called into IEP meetings. I'm like, what child is that? I don't even think they're in my class. Oh, well, we need a general educator in the IEP meeting. Well, what do I say when I go in there? This is before my daughter was identified. This is my experience before. This is why I fought so hard. Oh no, because I know what's going on, right? It was like light bulbs going off because I had that experience of being an educator. I was a high school teacher and I was a CTE teacher, career technology and education teacher, and taking classes in a master's program for my licensure, right? I did not know I'm being honest, I did not know how to help my students. I did the best that I could, but I was not educated on how to help my students with an IEP, right? So educators need to be developed, trained, and empowered, because there are a lot of educators that are showing up at conferences now, right? And they want the information, they want the knowledge, but then their hands are tied when they go back to their district.
Yeah, I think sort of speaking to the school administrators out there and the educators out there is even at very, very early age, at a very, very early age, I think we need to move away from the idea of just the sage on the stage, the one teacher having all the solutions to serve every child. I'm a supporter of inclusive education. And I think, one of the ways, like you go into schools, it's like, yeah, we got inclusive classrooms. And what does that mean? It means, like two educators in the room or two staff members in the room. But oftentimes the real test for it is there time built within the week and within the month for educators to be able to collaborate together, right? So that, if you're fortunate enough to be able to have a teacher that has literacy training, are they able to be a resource to everybody else in that building, to be able to provide some of that professional development and that pushing? And then if, through that collaboration, they can also bring in outside consultants to be able to address the issues, whatever they may be, literacy or what have you, of the diverse students in their class. And I think that's the reality too. We don't have these, like our schools are diverse, right? And our teachers are being asked to work with more and more students who have a variety of challenges. And so I think it's a collaborative effort. And then, I'm a supporter of public schools, and I'll say that very proudly. And I've had the opportunity to be able to work in and connect with private schools that do a great job. But I will also say that I don't think that all of our private schools have the answers as well, right? And I mean, I've interacted with many private schools where it's like, you're neurotypical, you go in, you pay one rate, and then, oh, we find out you're dyslexic, well, we got to charge you an extra fee, which for any other group, for any other demographic, I mean, would be appalling, right? And yeah, so like we address it, right? Like say it very directly, right? Like, you have to build a school that works for everybody. And I think that really has to be the earnest that our administrators go into, is that we're going to build schools that work for everyone. And then it's doing all that you can, and being humble and saying we need help and finding peers and colleagues in other schools. You may even have to go to another state to be able to learn from folks who are addressing the needs within your population.
You're not going to serve children with dyslexia well by accident. It's not just a byproduct of being a nice person. There has to be intentionality in the design of your lessons.
Knowledge, yeah.
There has to be intentionality in the curriculum you choose. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, Baltimore uses Wit and Wisdom, as you said, Winifred, and some other materials to support it. That's not a light curriculum. It's beautifully written, but it's not light. That thing takes time. So then my next question to them would be, and I've worked with Baltimore City. I just came back from speaking to their principals a couple weeks ago, matter of fact. My next question would be, how much time do the teachers have to actually plan out these lessons so they can make sure that kids who, the diverse array of students you have in your classroom, the neurological diversity, they can actually, by design, go get those kids every day. If that's not in the offing, then it's just hope. And that's hope. Listen, we all need hope, but that can't be the plan. That can't be the plan. You got to go get those kids. So if you speaking to that about curriculum, about professional development, leadership also matters, is huge, because it's more than just wanting equity or wanting, this is not a bumper sticker situation. This is, what are you doing every day to go get those kids, from the principal to the superintendent to the teacher to everybody else, and the parents like yourselves, making sure that everything is everything. The people are falling in line and doing what they're supposed to do or what they need to do to make sure kids are going to be all right. I can't thank y'all enough, man. Not just because of your experiences, but it's your voice and your willingness to branch out and lead in this area and share with people the realities of being Black and dyslexic, the realities of trying to navigate these school systems and the classrooms and the district, and what it's like to have access to and to not have access to power, and how to move in that regard on behalf of kids. I can't thank you all enough. Did you have any
No,
last
I just
thoughts you wanted to-
appreciate your time and your knowledge and your expertise. Thank you.
And where can people find, so where is your podcast? Look, it's the Black and Dyslexic podcast, right? Where can they find it? Where do they go?
They can find it on all of your favorite listening platforms, Black and Dyslexic, Apple, Google, YouTube. And then you can also go to our website, www.soallcanread.org. And then our Instagram is @Black and Dyslexic.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your leadership and your time and your expertise. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.